A 9-year-old girl in a wheelchair rolled to the front of her classroom to talk about her father. Her teacher picked up the project, read it once, and dropped it into the trash. Right in front of everyone. She stamped it false information and told the little girl to apologize for lying. 30 kids watched. Nobody said a word. What that teacher didn't know, what nobody in that school knew, was that the man she'd just called a fraud was already pulling into the parking lot, and he had a Belgian Malinois with him. If you've never seen a quiet man completely dismantle a room without raising his voice, you're about to. Don't go anywhere. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss what happens next, and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The rain started around 8 in the morning, the kind that came in sideways and soaked through jackets before anyone had time to react. Chloe Hayes noticed it against the bus window and pulled her sketchbook a little tighter to her chest. She'd been working on the drawing since Tuesday. 4 days, 3 erasers, 1 crumpled restart. It wasn't perfect. Her father's jaw came out a little too square, and she'd given Titan ears that were maybe 20% too large, but it was real. That was the word she kept coming back to. Her 3rd grade teacher, Ms. Patricia Garner, had assigned the hero project 2 weeks ago with a single instruction written in green marker on the whiteboard. Someone you admire, someone real. Chloe had known immediately. She wasn't the kind of kid who hesitated on things like that. The bus lurched to a stop in front of North Valley Academy, and Chloe maneuvered her wheelchair to the front with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing it since she was 4. The hydraulic ramp ground down. She rolled out into the rain, sketchbook balanced on her lap, and didn't bother with the hood of her jacket because it always fell over her eyes and she needed to see where she was going. Inside, the hallway smelled like wet sneakers and industrial cleaner. The usual chaos. 3rd graders slamming lockers, a pair of 5th grade boys arguing about something involving a trading card, a teacher calling out about running, flowed around her like water around a rock. Chloe had learned early that the world was not built for her pace, and she had also learned early that this was the world's problem, not hers. Her father had told her that more than once. She stored that thought carefully, the way she stored the drawing, and wheeled herself to room 114. Itashi. Ms. Garner's classroom was set up in a horseshoe, which was one of the things Chloe actually liked about it. Every desk faced the center, which meant nobody was invisible. She found her spot along the left arm of the horseshoe and set her sketchbook face down on the desk, the way the other kids were doing with their poster boards and printed photographs. She looked around without meaning to. Marcus Webb had a framed photo of his grandfather in a Navy uniform, actual medals pinned to a velvet backing. Destiny Okafor had built something that looked like a 3-dimensional display about her mother, a trauma nurse. Even Jake Paulson, who had never, in Chloe's experience, completed an assignment on time, had a printed booklet with a plastic cover. Chloe looked down at her sketchbook. It was fine. The drawing was good. She knew her story. Ms. Garner clapped once from the front of the room, her signature call to order, and the noise level dropped in the automatic way of children who had been conditioned to respond to it. All right, everyone. Hero Day. She smiled the smile she used for the camera during school events. Wide, bright, slightly disconnected from her eyes. We've been looking forward to this. Who wants to start? Several hands shot up. Chloe's was not among them. She always waited. She wanted to watch first, to understand the room before she put herself in the center of it. Her father had taught her that too, though he'd used different words. Read the terrain before you commit. The first 3 presentations were confident and well received. Marcus talked about his grandfather with a steady voice and got actual applause. Destiny made half the class laugh with a story about her mother performing first aid on a Thanksgiving turkey. Jake's booklet, it turned out, was about a baseball pitcher, which explained the plastic cover because apparently that was a serious topic. By the time Ms. Garner's eyes found Chloe, the room had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Chloe, would you like to share? It wasn't quite a question. Chloe squared her shoulders and wheeled herself to the front. She held up the drawing first, the way she'd practiced in her room the night before, turning it slowly so both sides of the horseshoe could see. Titan's oversized ears were maybe more obvious in the classroom light than she'd intended, but her father's face was right. The jaw, the steadiness in the eyes, the way he held himself. That was right. This is my dad. she said. His name is Ethan Hayes. He's a military K-9 handler. That means he and his dog work together on operations, finding people who are lost or missing or in danger. His partner is a Belgian Malinois named Titan. She'd practiced the word Malinois probably 40 times. It still felt slightly strange in her mouth, but she got it clean. They've been working together for 6 years. Titan can locate a human scent trail that's more than 72 hours old. He can clear a building in under 4 minutes. He's been on search and rescue operations where they found kids who had been missing for days. She paused. In her head, that was the moment the room was supposed to lean in. Instead, she heard a small sound from the front of the horseshoe. Not quite a laugh, something quieter, and in some ways worse. She looked up. Miss Garner was watching her with an expression Chloe didn't have a word for yet. She would later, when she was older, but at 9, all she knew was that it made something in her chest go cold. "Chloe," the teacher said with the careful, measured patience of someone choosing each word deliberately, "that's a very creative story." Chloe blinked. "It's not a story. It's what my dad does." Dogs can't clear buildings in 4 minutes. The teacher's tone was gentle in a way that wasn't gentle at all. "That's not how any of that works. Titan can. Dad timed it. He showed me the—" "Do you have documentation? Records? Anything that can be verified?" Chloe stared at her. She was 9. She had a drawing. "I could bring—" The assignment was to present factual information about a real hero. Ms. Garner moved to her desk, picked up a red marker, and walked to the front. Presenting fictional stories as fact isn't just inaccurate. It's misleading to your classmates. We talked about this when we discussed research methods last month, didn't we? The room had gone very quiet. Chloe could hear the rain. She could also hear, somewhere in the back half of the horseshoe, a sound that was unmistakably a suppressed laugh. She didn't look to see who it was. She was afraid of what she'd do if she saw. The red marker came down on her sketchbook's cover in 3 quick movements. False information. Then Ms. Garner's hand lifted the sketchbook from Chloe's lap. Not rough, not mean, just businesslike, and dropped it into the recycling bin beside the whiteboard. "I think we should move on," the teacher said pleasantly. "Marcus, would you like to share a little more about your grandfather's service?" Chloe sat in the front of the horseshoe while Marcus talked, and she did not cry. She was very clear on that with herself. She would not do that here. She looked at the recycling bin. The corner of her sketchbook was visible over the rim, the cover bent at an angle it hadn't had before. She thought about the sound it had made when it landed. That small, flat sound. She thought about her father's voice on the phone 2 nights ago, calling from wherever he was, the connection slightly broken the way it always was when he was in the field. "How's the project coming? You nervous?" "No," she'd told him. "I know what I'm talking about." And he'd laughed, low and real. "Yeah, you do." She stared at the recycling bin. She did not cry. The school day moved the way school days move when something bad has happened, but the world has decided to keep going anyway. Through math and silent reading, in a lunch period where several kids avoided her table and 2 others asked her, with the clinical curiosity of children, if she'd made the whole thing up. "No," Chloe said. Miss Garner said, "I know what she said." She ate her sandwich and looked out the cafeteria window at the parking lot. The rain had softened to a drizzle. Puddles were forming in the low spots near the drainage grate. She'd left the sketchbook in the recycling bin because she hadn't known what else to do with it, and because picking it up would have meant acknowledging in front of everyone that it had been put there. She wasn't ready for that. By the time the final bell rang, the story had moved through the school's nervous system with the efficiency that only elementary schools can manage. By 3:15, there were 5th graders in the hallway who had heard that a 3rd grader made up a story about a war hero, Dad, and got caught. The details had mutated with each retelling. In some versions, her father was a cartoon character she'd invented. In others, the teacher had given her detention. None of the versions were accurate. All of them were worse than the truth. Chloe's father was not there to pick her up. He was supposed to be, but the message on her after-school phone, a battered smartphone she was only allowed to use for emergency contacts, said he'd been held up and her Aunt Karen was coming. That was fine. That was normal. His schedule was not the kind of schedule that made promises it could keep. She sat on the bench outside the main entrance and watched puddles. When Aunt Karen's car pulled up, she transferred from the wheelchair to the passenger seat in the way she did everything, efficiently, without ceremony, and folded the chair into the back. Aunt Karen, who was her father's younger sister, and who had a talent for reading rooms that Chloe deeply respected, looked at her for a full 3 seconds before saying anything. "Bad day?" "Fine," Chloe said. Aunt Karen drove. After a while, she said, "Your project was today, right? How'd that go?" "Fine." Another silence. "You want to call your dad?" Chloe looked out the window at the wet streets. "He's working. He picks up." "I know." She paused. "Not tonight." She didn't tell her aunt what had happened. She was still deciding what it was exactly, whether it was the kind of thing that got told or the kind of thing that got carried until it either dissolved or hardened into something you didn't look at anymore. By the time they got home, she'd made a decision. She would not tell him. He had enough to carry. She underestimated him. She almost always did, which was strange because she also knew, more than most people knew anything, exactly what he was capable of. Ethan Hayes got home at 7:43, which was earlier than expected, which meant the operation had wrapped clean or been postponed. He came in through the garage in his civilian clothes, dark jeans, a gray Henley, boots that were older than some of her teachers, and he moved through the house in the quiet way he always did. The kind of quiet that wasn't absence, but presence. A man who'd learned to take up exactly the space he needed and no more. He kissed the top of her head. He made 2 cups of tea, strong for him, half strength with honey for her, and he sat down at the kitchen table across from her and did not say anything about the project for 17 minutes while they talked about other things. Whether Titan was going to need his hip checked again. A podcast her father had started listening to about historical naval strategy. A library book Chloe had almost finished. Then he got up to refill his mug, and on the way back he paused at the counter where she'd dropped her backpack. He didn't touch it, he just looked at it. "Chloe." "Yeah." "Where's your sketchbook?" She had been careful. She had put everything exactly where it usually went. She had been precise about it, but she had forgotten. And she always forgot this, and she didn't know why she kept forgetting. That precision is not the same as invisibility. Not to him. "I left it," she said. "At school." "Yeah." He came back to the table and sat down, and he looked at her with the particular quality of attention that she had spent her whole life on the receiving end of. The kind that didn't push but didn't leave either. "Tell me," he said. She didn't want to. She wanted to protect him from the specific indignity of it, the recycling bin, the red marker, the laughter. She was 9 years old and she was trying to protect her father, which was exactly as backward as it sounds. And she knew that even while she was doing it. But she told him. She kept it short. Facts, sequence, outcome. She had learned that from him too. When she finished, the kitchen was very quiet. He drank his tea. He set the mug down with the careful steadiness of a man who was managing something. "Ms. Garner," he said. "Yeah." She put it in the recycling bin. "The recycling bin, yeah, in front of everyone." He nodded slowly, not the nod of someone processing new information, the nod of someone arriving at a decision they'd been approaching for a while without knowing it. "Okay," he said. "Dad, I'm going to talk to the school." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." He looked at her. Not angry, not heated, something quieter and more certain than either of those things. "Eat your dinner. I'll drive you in tomorrow." That night, lying in bed with rain still pattering against the roof, Chloe stared at the ceiling and tried to decide whether she should feel better or worse. She felt both. What she hadn't told him, what she wasn't sure she had words for yet, was the way the room had looked when it happened, the way 30 kids had gone silent, the way Marcus had looked briefly at his own poster board and then quickly away, the way the teacher had been so pleasant about it, so unhurried, as if she were doing something obvious and correct. That was the part that had lodged in Chloe's chest like a splinter. Not the stamp, not the recycling bin. The certainty. Ms. Garner had been completely, absolutely certain. And somewhere between 7:43 and now, that certainty had stopped feeling like power and had started feeling, very quietly, like the thing right before a mistake. Chloe closed her eyes. In the morning, her father drove her to school. He had Titan in the back. Titan's nose was already working before the SUV came to a full stop. Ethan could see it in the rearview mirror, the dog's nostrils flaring in that rapid, shallow rhythm that meant he was cataloging the environment, filing everything away. Wet asphalt, diesel from the school bus idling near the curb, 40-something children moving through a space that smelled like lunch and industrial soap, and the specific nervous sweat of a place where people spent their days being evaluated. Titan didn't react to any of it. He just knew it. That was the difference between a working dog and every other animal on Earth. They didn't perform attention. They simply never stopped paying it. Ethan cut the engine. Chloe was already looking at the school entrance, her hands still in her lap, her jaw set in the particular way she had when she was bracing for something. "You don't have to come in," she said. "I know." "I mean it. I can just—" "Chloe." He said her name the way he said most things. Level, no edge to it, no drama. "I'm coming in." She looked at him for a second. Then she nodded and reached for the door handle. He came around to her side and had the wheelchair unfolded and positioned before she'd finished transferring. Not because she couldn't manage it alone, she could, and he knew it, and she knew he knew it, but because some things didn't need to be a demonstration of independence. They could just be a father and his daughter on a Tuesday morning. He clipped Titan's working lead, and the three of them moved toward the entrance. Titan walked at Ethan's left, not pulling, not lagging, simply matching his handler's pace with the loose-shouldered ease of a dog who understood exactly what his job was. Several kids near the front steps stopped talking. A woman with a coffee cup and a lanyard badge froze on the top step and stared at the Malinois with the expression people got when they encountered a large, clearly trained animal and couldn't decide if they were supposed to be concerned. Ethan held the door. Chloe wheeled through without looking at any of them. The front office of North Valley Academy smelled like toner and stale coffee, and the faint floral ghost of whoever had been at the reception desk longest. A woman looked up from a computer monitor, mid-50s, reading glasses pushed up into her hair, name tag that said Beverly, and her eyes went immediately to Titan. "Sir, I'm sorry, animals aren't permitted. He's a working military K9. Ethan reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and produced his ID with the same motion he'd made 10,000 times. "He's trained, current on all certifications, and he's leashed. I'm here to speak with the principal regarding an incident involving my daughter yesterday." Beverly looked at the ID, then at Titan, then at Chloe, who was positioned slightly behind her father's left side and watching the whole exchange with the controlled blankness of a kid who had learned to make herself small in adult conversations. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, I do have the morning." A beat. Beverly picked up the phone. While she made the call, Ethan stood with his hands loose at his sides and looked around the office with the unhurried assessment of someone who had spent years being paid to notice things. Bulletin board with the school's mission statement and a cluster of student artwork. Trophy case with athletic awards going back 15 years. A framed professional photo of the current principal, James Decker, according to the nameplate on the door to the inner office, smiling in the way principals smiled for professional photos, slightly too wide, positioned at a 3/4 angle. "Mr. Decker can see you in about 20 minutes, Beverly said. "He has a staff meeting that's just wrapping up." "That's fine." He sat down in one of the chairs along the waiting area wall. Chloe rolled up beside him. Titan settled at Ethan's feet with his chin on his paws, ears relaxed, though his eyes tracked the door. "You okay?" Ethan asked, quietly enough that Beverly couldn't hear. "Why does everyone keep asking me that?" "Because everyone keeps being worried about you." Chloe looked at her hands. "I'm fine. I just want it to be over." "It'll be over soon." "Promise?" He thought about that for a second. He didn't make promises he wasn't certain of. She knew that. It was one of the things she counted on. "Yeah," he said. "I promise." James Decker was the kind of man who had spent so long managing people that managing had become his natural register for all human interaction. He was somewhere north of 50, with the soft authority of someone who had been in charge long enough to stop needing to prove it, and he shook Ethan's hand with both of his in the way of politicians and men who had taken a course on active listening. "Mr. Hayes, thank you for coming in. Please sit down." His office was larger than it needed to be. Diplomas on the wall, a motivational poster that had probably been there since 2004, a desk that was clean in the way of someone whose assistant handled the things that would otherwise make it messy. Ethan sat. Chloe positioned herself beside him. Titan, after a hand signal from Ethan, settled on the floor between them. Decker looked at the dog, then at Ethan, then at Chloe with the particular softness adults deployed when they wanted to acknowledge a child without quite engaging with her. "I understand we had a situation yesterday." "There was an incident, yes," Ethan said. "I've spoken briefly with Ms. Garner this morning. She described it as a misunderstanding. She said she was concerned about the factual accuracy of Chloe's presentation and handled it in perhaps an overly direct way. She stamped my daughter's project false information and threw it in the recycling bin in front of 30 kids. Decker's expression went carefully neutral. "Yes, I understand that's what Chloe described." "That's what happened," Chloe said. Decker looked at her. The softness shifted slightly. "Chloe, sometimes adults have to make judgment calls in the classroom, and, Mr. Decker," Ethan's voice was still level. It hadn't changed register once since they'd walked in, which Chloe noticed, and which she was starting to understand was its own kind of weapon. "I'm not here to talk about classroom judgment calls. I'd like Ms. Garner to be part of this conversation." A pause. "I can see if she's available between classes. I'll wait." Another pause, slightly longer. Decker picked up his desk phone. Patricia Garner was a woman who had clearly decided sometime in the 2 years since the photo on the school website had been taken that projecting confidence was more important than projecting warmth. She came into the office carrying a coffee mug and her lesson planner, which she set on the corner of Decker's desk as if establishing territory, and she sat in the chair across from Ethan with the posture of someone who had been called to a meeting they found slightly beneath them. She looked at Titan first. They all looked at Titan first, and then at Ethan, and something moved briefly through her expression that wasn't quite recognition, but was adjacent to it. A recalibration. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "I'm glad we have the chance to talk." "Ms. Garner." He didn't extend his hand. "My daughter says you told her class that her presentation contained false information." "I said it contained claims that couldn't be verified." "She's 9. She presented a drawing she made and facts she knew about her father's work. She made very specific technical claims." Garner's voice stayed pleasant, professional, the tone of someone who was used to navigating parent complaints. "About a military working dog's capabilities. Dogs clearing buildings in 4 minutes, locating scent trails 72 hours old. I had no way to verify any of that, and I have a responsibility to the entire class." "To do what, exactly?" She blinked. It was a short, flat question that didn't leave her a lot of room. "To model critical thinking. To distinguish between... You distinguished between what her father does for a living and what you assumed her father does for a living." Ethan's voice had not changed. This was, Chloe thought, the most frightening part. He sounded exactly like he'd sounded, asking if she wanted pancakes on Saturday morning. "You made that distinction in front of her entire class without any information, without asking her a single question about what I actually do, and then you threw her work in the trash." "I put it in the recycling bin." "Does the difference matter to a 9-year-old? Garner's mouth closed. Decker cleared his throat. "Mr. Hayes, I want you to know that we take concerns like this very seriously. If there was a miscommunication, there wasn't a miscommunication." Ethan reached into his jacket and produced a small, flat folder. Not thick, not theatrical. Just a folder, the kind you could buy at any office supply store. He set it on the desk between himself and Decker without opening it. "I brought Chloe's service records, my records. K-9 certifications, commendations, mission summaries. The capability parameters Chloe described are accurate. They're in the documentation." Decker looked at the folder. Garner looked at the folder. Neither of them reached for it. "I'm sure that's all very impressive," Garner said, and there was something in her voice now. Not quite condescension, but close enough to it that Chloe felt her fingers tighten on her armrests. But the issue isn't really about the specific facts. It's about how Chloe presented them. She was very, she paused, choosing the word carefully, emotional about it. She wasn't able to respond to basic questions. She's in third grade, which is exactly why we need to teach them early that feelings and facts are different things. Something shifted in the room. It was subtle, a degree of temperature maybe, or the particular quality of silence that came after certain sentences. Decker felt it. He shifted in his chair. Titan's ears moved, not dramatically, just a degree of rotation, tracking something in Ethan's posture that the humans in the room hadn't consciously registered yet. "Ms. Garner," Ethan said, "my daughter was crying when she finished telling me what happened last night. Children are resilient." She wasn't crying because she was sad. He paused. She was crying because she was angry. She couldn't figure out how to explain to me that she'd told the truth and you hadn't believed her, and there was nothing she could do about it. Another pause. "That's a specific kind of upset. Takes a while to get over." Garner's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I understand you feel your daughter was treated unfairly," she said, "but I have to maintain the integrity of my classroom. Mr. Decker," Ethan turned to the principal and opened the folder. "I'd like you to look at this." The documents were unremarkable to look at. Decker had probably expected something more dramatic, framed citations, military regalia, the kind of visual evidence that announced itself. Instead, there were printed pages with federal agency letterheads, certification records, a series of after-action summaries with sections redacted in thick black bars, and a deployment log that covered 6 years of K-9 operations across 4 states and 2 overseas rotations. Decker read slowly. Garner, who had not been offered the folder but could see the pages from where she sat, read faster, with the focused intensity of someone searching for an escape route that wasn't there. The certifications were extensive. Search and rescue, narcotics detection, explosive ordnance support, human remains detection. A specialist classification that neither Decker nor Garner would have been able to define, but which carried enough official weight that its presence changed the shape of the room. A commendation letter from a federal agency whose name Garner did know, signed by someone whose title made Decker sit up a fraction of an inch. And in the middle of the stack, a single page that was a summary of an operation from 14 months ago. The names were redacted. The location was redacted. The operational detail was redacted. What remained was a timeline and an outcome. 3 children located, extracted, and returned to their families after a 78-hour disappearance. K-9 handler, an animal performed without critical error. Decker set that page down and looked at Ethan. Garner wasn't looking at anyone. She was looking at the desk. "I owe your daughter an apology," Decker said. It was a sentence that arrived without preamble, and it was the first thing the man had said in the last 20 minutes that didn't feel managed. "That's between you and Chloe," Ethan said. Decker nodded. He looked at Garner, and something passed between them that Chloe couldn't quite decode, a kind of professional accounting, rapid and uncomfortable. "Patricia," he said. "I may have been hasty," she said, and the words came out careful and flat, the words of someone calculating minimum acceptable damage. "If the information is accurate," "It's accurate," Ethan said. "Then She stopped. Started again. "I should have asked to see supporting documentation before I made a determination in front of the class." Chloe had been quiet for most of the last 40 minutes. She had learned, again from her father, that in rooms where adults were having important conversations, the most powerful thing a kid could do was not give them an excuse to redirect. But something about the word determination, the clinical, bloodless way Garner had said it, caught in her throat. "You didn't ask me anything," Chloe said. Everyone looked at her. "You didn't ask me one question before you did it." She kept her voice even. She was working at it, but she kept it. "If you'd asked me one question, I could have told you to call my dad. I could have told you he'd come in. I could have given you his number." She paused. "You didn't ask." Garner opened her mouth. "Let her finish," Ethan said. Another silence. "I drew that for 4 days," Chloe said. "I practiced saying his name right, the dog's name right, because I knew I'd mess it up if I didn't. I wanted it to be good. She looked at the principal, not the teacher, not yet. She wasn't ready for that yet. You have all those trophies in the case outside, all those kids who did things right and got recognized for it. I just wanted to tell the truth about my dad. That's all I wanted to do. The room was quiet. Decker had the particular expression of a man who had spent years managing things and was currently confronting something he couldn't manage. "Chloe," he said, "I want to make this right." "Okay," she said. "How?" He didn't have an answer ready. That was answer enough. They agreed, or Decker agreed, while Garner maintained the expression of someone enduring a necessary procedure, that there would be a formal meeting later in the week with the assistant principal and the school's parent liaison. That Chloe's project would be formally reinstated in the gradebook. That a letter would go home to parents acknowledging that a classroom incident had been handled incorrectly. It was not, as Ethan had predicted to himself on the drive-in, nothing. But it was also not enough. It was the first offer, which meant it was the floor, not the ceiling. He thanked Decker and shook his hand. He did not shake Garner's hand. He did not make anything out of not shaking her hand. He simply didn't offer it, and she didn't extend hers, and they moved out of that moment and into the hallway as if it hadn't happened. Chloe was quiet until they were through the main doors and back in the morning air, which had warmed slightly from when they'd arrived. The drizzle had stopped. Wet pavement caught the sun in flat, coin-shaped patches. "That's it?" she asked. "For today?" "What does that mean?" He looked down at her. "It means that's what they were willing to give us in a 20-minute meeting, and now they have the weekend to think about what happens if it doesn't go further." She processed that. "And what does happen if it doesn't go further?" "Then it goes further." She almost smiled. Almost. Titan walked at Ethan's left, unhurried, ears soft. At the SUV, Ethan loaded Chloe's chair into the back and Titan into his compartment, and then he stood at the driver's door for a moment before getting in, looking at the school building with the flat, patient attention of a man doing math. The meeting had not gone the way he'd expected. He'd expected more resistance, or more contrition, or something with cleaner edges. Instead, he'd gotten something slippery. The institutional pivot, the minimum concession, the acknowledgement shaped like an apology that wasn't quite one. Garner's last look as they'd left the office had stayed with him. She hadn't looked defeated. She'd looked recalibrated, like someone who had encountered an obstacle and was already working the angles on a way around it. He didn't say this to Chloe. She'd been through enough for one morning, and she had school to get to, and there was a version of this that resolved cleanly without anyone needing to push harder. He got in and started the engine. That was Tuesday. By Thursday afternoon, Garner had gone to the district office. Ethan got the call at 4:17 from a number he didn't recognize. He was in the garage running a maintenance check on his gear, not a deployment prep, just the habit of someone who treated readiness as a default state. And he answered on the second ring. "Mr. Hayes, my name is Sandra Pruitt. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction at the district office. I'm calling because we've received a concern from one of our teachers at North Valley Academy regarding an incident earlier this week." He set down the cleaning rod for the radio unit he'd been working on and leaned against the workbench. "Go ahead," he said. "Ms. Garner has raised a concern that during a meeting on Tuesday you were, her word, intimidating. She's expressed worry about the appropriateness of bringing a large animal into a school environment during what was described as an already tense situation." Ethan looked at his reflection in the darkened window above the workbench. He looked tired. He probably was. "She's filing a complaint," he said. It wasn't a question. "She's raised a concern," Pruitt said, and the distinction was the kind that district administrators were trained to make, the verbal equivalent of soft armor. "We want to make sure everyone feels safe and heard in this process. Ms. Pruitt, my daughter is 9 years old. She was publicly humiliated in her classroom in front of 30 of her peers. I came in the next morning with documented proof that every claim my daughter made was accurate, and the response is that her teacher feels intimidated." A pause. "I understand this is a frustrating situation. What's the district's position on what happened to my daughter?" "We're still in the process of, because right now I have documentation, an incident that's on record, and a teacher who's trying to reframe the story before the meeting on Friday." He wasn't heating up. He was making sure the words landed in the right order. If the district's position is that my daughter's teacher gets to do that without anyone addressing what she actually did, I'd like to know that now rather than Friday. Another pause, longer this time. Mr. Hayes, I assure you the district takes the well-being of all students seriously. Good. Then I'll see you Friday. He hung up. He stood in the garage for a moment with the phone in his hand, listening to the house. Upstairs, he could hear the faint sound of Chloe's TV. She watched nature documentaries while she did homework, a habit she'd had since first grade that he'd never had any intention of breaking. Titan was somewhere in the house, probably stationed outside her door the way he tended to do when he sensed that the household was operating at an elevated stress level, which Ethan had never trained him to do, and which he did anyway. He thought about Sandra Pruitt's voice, the careful bureaucratic remove of it, the way she'd said feels safe and heard, with the fluency of someone who'd said it so many times it had stopped meaning anything specific. He thought about Garner's face when she'd looked at the folder. Not embarrassed, not guilty, working the angles. He went inside, washed his hands, and went upstairs to knock on Chloe's door. Yeah. Dinner in 20. You want to pick? A pause. Tacos? Tacos works. He started to head back downstairs. Behind the door. Dad? Yeah. Did something happen? He leaned against the door frame. Nothing you need to worry about tonight. But something happened. He could lie to her. He was capable of it. He'd done it before, in the way parents did. The comfortable lies, the small shelters. But there was a particular quality to the way she asked, a careful steadiness that she'd had since she was very young, that made him feel the dishonesty before he even opened his mouth. Friday's meeting got more complicated, he said. I'll handle it. A longer pause. Okay, she said finally. Tacos. Tacos, he confirmed. He went downstairs. He did not tell her that by Friday morning, the meeting had been escalated from a parent-principal conference to a formal district review, that Garner's complaint had been formally logged, and that a district liaison named Kevin Marsh, who had the specific energy of someone whose job was to prevent things from becoming lawsuits, had called to inform Ethan that the Friday session would now include Ms. Garner, Mr. Decker, Sandra Pruitt, the school's parent liaison, and a district HR representative. He did not tell her that he had spent 2 hours that evening on the phone with his former unit's JAG contact, not for legal advice exactly, but for the kind of conversation you had when you wanted to understand which cards you were holding before you sat down at the table. He did not tell her any of that. What he did was make tacos, and he let her put too much cheese on hers the way she always did, and Titan sat between their chairs hoping for ground beef, and the evening was ordinary in all the ways evenings needed to be ordinary when the next day was going to ask a great deal of you. At 8:45, after Chloe was asleep, he went back out to the garage. He opened the folder again in the yellow workbench light and went through it page by page, not looking for anything new. He knew what was there, just making sure he knew exactly what he was walking in with, because Sandra Pruitt had made one mistake on the phone. Maybe she didn't know it yet. Maybe Garner didn't either. They'd spent 3 days trying to manage the optics of what happened to Chloe. They'd been so focused on the optics that they hadn't stopped to ask themselves a simple question. Why would a man carrying that kind of documentation, federal certifications, multi-agency commendations, redacted mission files with outcomes that a public school teacher couldn't have come close to inventing? Why would a man like that need to exaggerate anything? He closed the folder. Friday was going to be a long morning. He was already looking forward to it. He slept 4 hours. Not because he couldn't sleep more. He'd trained himself out of needing it, the way you trained yourself out of a lot of things after enough rotations. But because his mind had been running the Friday meeting in loop since 2 in the morning, and somewhere around 4:30, he'd accepted that lying in the dark was less useful than getting up and being productive about it. He made coffee. He went through the folder one more time, not because he needed to, but because repetition was how he managed uncertainty. Not by eliminating it, but by making sure everything he could control was locked down so tight that the uncertainty had nowhere to attach. He'd learned that in the field. You controlled your equipment, your positioning, your communication. You could not control the terrain or the weather or what waited on the other side of a door. So you stopped spending energy on those things and put it entirely into what you could fix. The documentation was clean, the certifications were current, the chain of record-keeping was unbroken. He closed the folder at 5:15 and watched the kitchen window go from black to gray to the pale, washed-out blue of a morning that hadn't committed to anything yet. Chloe came down at 6:40 in her school clothes, her hair still damp from the shower, and looked at the coffee and the folder on the table and at him. "You didn't sleep," she said. "I slept." She looked at the folder. "Is that what you're bringing today?" "Part of it." She poured herself a glass of orange juice and sat across from him and didn't ask what the other part was, which was one of the things he appreciated most about her. She understood, at 9 years old, that some questions were requests for reassurance and others were requests for information, and she was good at figuring out which was worth asking. "Am I going to school?" she said. "After the meeting." "What time's the meeting?" 8:30. She nodded, drank her juice, and looked out the window at the yard. The grass was still wet from earlier in the week. Titan was outside doing his morning patrol of the perimeter. Not a trained behavior, just a thing he did, a habit the dog had developed on his own over years of living with a handler who treated readiness as a permanent condition. "Dad?" Chloe said. "Yeah." "What if they don't care about the documentation, about any of it? What if they just decide they're right and we have to live with it?" He thought about that. He could give her the reassuring answer, the one that said institutions were accountable and truth won in the end. He didn't do that. "Then we don't live with it," he said. "We take it somewhere they can't ignore it." She looked at him. "Like where?" "Depends on what they do this morning." She nodded slowly, the way she nodded when she was filing something away to think about later. Titan came back in through the dog door, shook himself once, and positioned himself next to Chloe's chair. She put her hand on his head without looking at him, automatic, the gesture of a kid who had grown up with this animal as a fixed point in a world that moved around. "Okay," she said. "Let's go." The district office was a different building than North Valley Academy, a flat, modern structure about 2 miles away that had the specific aesthetic of a place designed to communicate competence without communicating anything personal. Clean lines, institutional carpeting in a color that suggested gray without quite committing to it. Motivational phrases stenciled on the walls in a font that had been approved by a committee. They arrived at 8:19. The receptionist, younger than Beverly, visibly less comfortable with the Malinois, directed them to a conference room on the second floor where a placard on the door read, "Meeting in progress," which was technically inaccurate since the meeting hadn't started yet, but which was the kind of detail Ethan filed and didn't remark on. The conference room was rectangular, long table down the center, windows along one wall looking out at a parking lot. It smelled like a room that was cleaned every night and used heavily every day. 6 chairs on one side of the table were occupied. Decker, who nodded at Ethan when he came in with something that wanted to be collegial but landed closer to guilty. Garner, who was looking at her legal pad and did not look up. A woman Ethan placed as Sandra Pruitt from the way she'd positioned herself at the center of the row, the authority seat. A man in a gray suit who introduced himself as Kevin Marsh, District HR, a younger woman with a laptop who was apparently the parent liaison, though she'd never been introduced to Ethan before today, and a person from the school board's community relations office whose name Ethan immediately forgot because she'd given it too fast. 1 chair on the other side of the table. 1. Ethan set the folder down, pulled the chair back, and looked at Chloe. "Carl, can we get another chair?" he asked the room. A small hesitation. Marsh gestured to the parent liaison, who stood and retrieved a chair from the stack along the wall. Ethan positioned it so that Chloe could roll up to the table directly, which required adjusting the table's angle slightly. Nobody offered to help. He did it himself, one-handed, without interrupting the rhythm of settling in. Titan went down beside Ethan's chair. His presence in the room had a gravitational quality, not threatening exactly, but present in a way that large, silent, purposeful things tended to be. Ethan had noticed this effect in a lot of rooms over the years and had stopped trying to soften it. The dog was what he was. "Thank you all for coming," Pruitt said, with the voice of someone who'd opened 1,000 meetings. "I want to start by acknowledging that this has been a difficult week for everyone involved, and our goal today is to find a path forward that—" "Ms. Pruitt," Ethan said, Before we talk about paths forward, I'd like to establish what actually happened, because I think we may have different starting points. A beat. Of course, she said. Her voice didn't change. She was good. My daughter presented a factual account of her father's military service for a school assignment. Her teacher publicly invalidated that account without asking a single question, marked her work as false information, discarded it in front of 30 children, and told her to apologize for lying. He paused. That's what happened. Is that the district's understanding of the incident? Pruitt looked at Garner. Garner was still looking at her legal pad. We understand there was a classroom incident involving a student presentation, Marsh said carefully, and that there are different perspectives on how it was handled. There's one perspective, Chloe said. Everyone looked at her. She had not spoken since they'd sat down. What happened, she said. It's not a different perspective. It either happened or it didn't. Decker made a sound that wasn't quite a cough. Marsh put his pen down and picked it back up. Chloe, we absolutely want to hear your experience. You have it. I just told you. Ethan let the silence sit for a moment. He'd learned that rooms like this, run by people like Marsh, were designed to fill silence with process, with procedure and language and the accumulated weight of institutional habit. The silence made them uncomfortable in a way that worked in his favor. I have documentation, he said, and opened the folder. Sika. He didn't present it the way a lawyer would, building to a reveal. He put it on the table and let them read it, page by page, in the order it was organized. There was something in the straightforwardness of it that was, he knew, more effective than drama. Drama gave people something to react to. Plain evidence gave them nothing to do but process. Pruitt read. Marsh read. Decker had read it Tuesday, but read it again with a different quality of attention now that more people were in the room. Garner read it last, or pretended to. Ethan watched her eyes, and they weren't tracking the text properly, which meant she'd either seen it already, Decker might have shared it, or she was reading for appearance rather than information. The commendation from the federal agency was, as it had been on Tuesday, the page that changed the room's atmosphere. It was a specific kind of document, the kind that didn't get generated by bureaucratic routine. It existed because someone had done something that warranted it existing. The language was spare and official, but spare official language about a canine handler who had located 3 children in a 78-hour window meant something distinct and concrete, and everyone in the room who read it understood what it meant. Marsh set it down. Mr. Hayes, he said, and his tone had shifted, not dramatically, but enough. I want to be clear that the district deeply respects your service. That's not what this is about. Of course, what I mean is, what this is about, Ethan said, is that my daughter told the truth and was punished for it by a person in authority who didn't check before she acted. That's the issue. My service record is only relevant because it proves my daughter wasn't lying, but she shouldn't have needed proof. She's 9. The parent liaison, her name, he'd caught it off her badge, was Tanya Reeves, was writing something on her notepad. Not official notes. The handwriting was too irregular for that. Processing notes, he thought. The kind you made when something landed. Ms. Garner, Pruitt said, turning to the teacher. Garner looked up. Would you like to respond? The teacher set her pen down. She had been preparing this. He could see that, the slight arrangement of posture, the breath. And what came out was the version she'd workshopped. Not an admission. Not quite a deflection either. Something engineered to occupy the space between them. I want to say first that I have always had Chloe's best interests at heart. She's a bright student, and I've enjoyed having her in my class. She paused. On the day of the presentations, I made a judgment call that I now understand was insufficient. I didn't have the context that Mr. Hayes' documentation provides, and I reacted in a way that, in retrospect, I would handle differently. Ethan waited. That was it. That was the whole thing. You'd handle it differently, Chloe said. Garner looked at her. What would you do different? I would ask to see supporting documentation before. I'm 9, Chloe said. I don't carry documentation about my dad to school, because I'm 9. She wasn't angry. Her voice was steady in a way that reminded Ethan painfully of himself at an age when he hadn't yet learned to be steady. You could have called him. You could have sent a note home. You could have just said, I'm not sure, let's check. You threw my drawing in the trash. Chloe, Decker started. The project, Garner said, was placed. You threw it, Chloe said. That's what you did. The room was quiet. Reeves had stopped writing. Pruitt was looking at her hands. Marsh was doing the expression of a man who had thought he understood the dimensions of this problem and was revising upward. Ms. Garner, Ethan said quietly, do you have a child? The shift in subject surprised her. She blinked. Yes. Then you understand what it costs a kid to stand up in front of their class and talk about something they're proud of, the rehearsing, the wanting it to go right. He didn't look away from her. Chloe practiced that presentation for 4 days. She made sure she could pronounce the breed name correctly. She drew a picture of her father and his partner. A pause. And you made the people who mattered most to her laugh at her. Garner's face had gone through several things in the last 30 seconds that she probably hadn't intended to show. That wasn't my intention. I know, Ethan said. That's almost the whole problem. Us. What followed was 40 minutes of the kind of institutional process that existed primarily to give everyone in the room the sensation of moving forward while ensuring that nothing irreversible was committed to before it had been reviewed by people who weren't in the room. Pruitt talked about district policies on classroom management. Marsh outlined the formal complaint procedure and what Garner's filed concern would and wouldn't affect. Reeves, the parent liaison, asked Chloe 3 questions about her experience that were thoughtful enough that Chloe actually answered them in full. Ethan let it go where it went. He'd said the things that needed saying. The folder was on the table. The room knew what it knew. What he was watching now was Garner. She'd recomposed. The workshopped response once delivered had given her something to stand behind, a position that was technically an acknowledgement without being an admission. She was good at this in the way people got good at things they practiced out of necessity. She'd been in rooms like this before, probably. Parents who pushed back. Administrators who needed to be appeased. She knew how to give just enough to make the room feel resolved without conceding anything she'd actually have to carry. But she'd looked at the folder. She'd read the commendation letter, and now, Ethan noticed this, she was no longer looking at him. She was looking at Titan. The dog was lying flat, chin on paws, eyes half closed in the way he went when he was conserving, not sleeping. She'd been looking at him intermittently since the meeting started, the way people looked at things that had recalibrated their sense of a situation. A few times her gaze lingered, and there was something in her expression that Ethan couldn't quite name, but that he'd seen before in the field, in the moments after a perimeter got established, and people on the wrong side of it started understanding what the parameters actually were. She was not as certain as she'd been on Tuesday. That was the difference. At 9:57, Pruitt summarized, the district would conduct a formal review of the classroom incident. Garner's complaint about the school visit would be noted, but not escalated given the confirmed documentation of Titan's working status. The gradebook reinstatement that Decker had agreed to Tuesday would be formalized in writing. A meeting with Chloe's full teaching team would be scheduled within 2 weeks to establish, quote, clear communication protocols for student presentations involving family members and specialized professions. That last phrase made Ethan's jaw tighten slightly. He didn't show it. One more thing, he said, as Pruitt was closing her folio. She looked at him. Chloe was given an assignment. She completed it. She was not allowed to finish her presentation. He let that sit for exactly 1 second. I'd like her to have the opportunity to finish it. Pruitt looked at Decker. Decker looked at Garner. Garner's expression was the expression of someone who had accepted an outcome and was reassessing whether acceptance had been premature. In the classroom, Decker asked. That would be a start, Ethan said. Sad. The drive to school was quiet. Chloe was looking out the window with the hollowed-out expression of someone who had spent the last 2 hours at a frequency they weren't built to sustain for extended periods. Which was fair. Which was exactly what had happened. Ethan drove with one hand on the wheel and didn't push for conversation. After about 4 minutes, she said, "She's not sorry." "No," he agreed. "She said the right things, but she's not sorry. People can do the right thing without feeling the right thing. Both can still matter." Chloe thought about that. Does it? If she's not actually sorry, does the apology do anything? It puts something on record. It changes what she can do next. Because people are watching now. Because people are watching now. She absorbed this. Outside, the town moved past. A gas station, a dry cleaner, a stretch of fast food that gave way to the residential quiet near the school. She was scared of Titan, Chloe said. A little. He didn't do anything? Doesn't matter. She didn't know what he might do. That's enough. Chloe was quiet for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, "Is that why you brought him?" He glanced at her in the rear view. "I brought him because he goes where I go," Ethan said. "That's what partners do." She held his gaze in the mirror for a second, then looked back out the window. Something in her had settled, or maybe just shifted into a different position, finding a new way to carry what the morning had put in her. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay," he said. He pulled into the school drop-off and came around for the chair, and Titan watched from his compartment with the steady banked attention he always had when Chloe was moving away from the vehicle. A behavior that had developed so gradually over 6 years that Ethan had never been able to identify the exact point at which it became a habit. He watched his daughter wheel herself up the ramp toward the entrance and did not allow himself to feel the specific fury that had been sitting in his chest since Tuesday afternoon when she told him about the sketchbook with her voice carefully controlled and her hands in her lap. The fury was there. He knew where it was. He wasn't going to use it yet. But Friday had not resolved the way the district wanted it to resolve. He'd watched The Room, and he'd watched Garner, and he knew the difference between a problem that had been solved and a problem that had been postponed. He also knew something that no one in that conference room had known coming in, and that most of them still didn't fully know going out. The documentation they'd seen, the certifications, the commendations, the mission summary, that was the version of the record cleared for contexts like this one. The version that could be handed across a conference table to a school principal and an HR manager without requiring a security briefing. There was another version. There had always been another version. Ethan had not brought it because he hadn't needed it, and because he was the kind of man who did not show everything at once. But it existed, and if Friday's meeting turned out to be, as he was increasingly suspecting, the opening position in a longer argument rather than the resolution of a shorter one, then the question of what came next was not really a question. He got back in the SUV. Titan shifted in his compartment, resettling, ears moving toward the school building once before going soft again. Ethan pulled out of the drop-off and drove. He had the afternoon to think. By evening, he'd know what needed to happen. And by Monday, one way or another, so would everyone else. The weekend passed. The way weekends passed when something unfinished was sitting in the middle of the house. Everyone moving around it, not quite naming it, but aware of its exact dimensions at all times. Saturday, Ethan ran a 12-mile route before Chloe woke up, Titan ranging ahead and circling back in the way he did when they were off duty, the loose, happy trot of a working dog allowed to be something closer to just a dog for a few hours. When Ethan got back, Chloe was in the kitchen attempting to make eggs, which she could do competently from her chair at the lowered counter section he'd had installed 2 years ago, though she always slightly underestimated how fast the pan got hot and ended up with the edges browned a little more than she intended. She didn't say anything about the meeting. He didn't either. They watched a nature documentary in the afternoon, something about deep ocean ecosystems that Chloe found genuinely fascinating and that Ethan found easy to sit through, which was its own kind of companionship. Titan slept across their feet, which he technically wasn't supposed to do on the furniture, but which was a rule that had been selectively enforced since approximately his second month in the house. Sunday, Ethan spent 3 hours in the garage. Not on gear, on paper. He had a contact, a woman named Rourke, former federal investigator now doing private consulting, who he'd worked an overlap with on a missing persons case 2 years back. She had a particular gift for institutional pressure, the kind that didn't announce itself loudly, but was felt in the way water was felt when it found the cracks in something that thought it was sealed. He'd sent her an email Friday evening, brief and factual, and by Sunday morning she'd responded with 3 questions and a list of district-level reporting requirements that were, in her words, worth knowing before Monday. He read the list twice and filed it in the folder. By Sunday night, he'd mapped out 3 contingencies depending on how Monday went, which was how he operated, not because he was pessimistic, but because a man who planned for one outcome was a man who got surprised by all the others. Chloe went to bed at 9. She'd been quieter than usual all weekend, Not sad exactly, more like she was processing something at a level below the one where she had words for it. He recognized the mode. He'd raised her alone long enough to know the difference between the quiet that needed intervention and the quiet that needed space. He left her the space. At 9:40, he got a text from a number he'd given only to two people at that school, Tanya Reeves, the parent liaison. Mr. Hayes, thought you should know before tomorrow. Ms. Garner has submitted a formal addendum to her complaint. She's claiming you used Titan to create an intimidating environment during Tuesday's meeting and that your behavior during the Friday session constituted hostile engagement. District HR has flagged it for review. Meeting may be affected. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be telling you this, but I thought it was right. He read it twice. Then he set the phone face down on the workbench and looked at the garage ceiling for a moment. She hadn't been recalibrating in that conference room. She'd been documenting every look she'd given Titan, every pause, every moment she could later describe as feeling unsafe or pressured. She'd been building a secondary record in real time, right across the table from him, and he hadn't read it correctly because he'd been watching her read the folder. He picked the phone back up and typed, "Thank you. I mean it." Then he sat for a while in the yellow garage light, very still, thinking. The thing about a certain kind of person, and he'd known enough of them in his life to have a working taxonomy, was that they were not actually motivated by being right. Being right was useful only insofar as it protected them. What they were motivated by was not losing. Those were different targets, and they required different responses. He'd gone into the Friday meeting trying to establish the truth. Garner had gone in trying to survive the room. He should have seen that coming. He had seen it, actually, in outline. The recalibration he'd noticed, the angles. He just hadn't expected the speed of the counter move. He went inside. He didn't sleep immediately, but he was in bed by 11, which was close enough. At 4:40 Monday morning, his phone rang. The number was one he knew. He was awake and sitting up before the second ring. "Hayes, it's Carver." The voice on the other end was the voice of a man who'd been awake for longer than Ethan had, with the flat efficiency of someone moving through a task list. Staff Sergeant David Carver, currently assigned to the same regional K-9 coordination unit that Ethan worked out of, based out of the federal facility 40 minutes east. "Sorry for the hour. Got a notification flag on your name from the district office. Administrative complaint, possible conduct review. You want to tell me what's going on, or should I guess?" Ethan told him, concisely, in the sequence it had happened, without editorializing. When he finished, Carver was quiet for a moment. "The teacher filed against you. And Titan. She filed against the dog. She implied Titan was used to threaten. Her language was deliberate deployment of a trained animal to create psychological pressure." Another silence. Then, from Carver, "You're kidding me." "I'm not." "Hayes, that dog couldn't intimidate a mailbox if he tried." "She doesn't know that." "That's the point, isn't it?" It wasn't a question. "She doesn't know what he can do, so she filled in the gap with whatever scared her most." "Yeah," Carver exhaled. "Okay, here's why I'm calling. The complaint flagged at our level because Titan is on the unit's asset registry. Anything that mentions him officially goes through us, which means I've got paperwork on this, and my CO is going to have questions." "I know." "It also means," Carver said, "that if the district tries to escalate this into something formal, they're going to bump into the unit, which is going to be a fun conversation for them. I'm not trying to make this into a federal situation, Carver. I know you're not, but here's the thing. You may not get to choose." A pause. "There's a secondary piece, the unit CO, Major Hess. She wants a briefing. Not punitive, don't worry. She's seen the district complaint and she wants to understand the context before it gets to anyone above her." Ethan looked at the window. Gray pre-dawn. Somewhere outside, Titan was already alert. He'd heard Ethan on the phone and had moved from his bed to the hallway outside the bedroom door. His standard positioning when he sensed the household shifting into a different mode. "When does she want it?" Ethan said. "This morning. She can do 8. The district meeting, if it was still happening, was scheduled for 10. That was the meeting where, according to Tanya Reeves's Sunday night text, Garner's addendum would be formally introduced, and Ethan would be given the opportunity to respond to the new complaint. "I can do 8, he said. "I'll tell her." "And Hayes?" "Yeah." "Bring the folder." Major Christine Hess had the office of someone who used their space as a working tool rather than a statement. No motivational posters, no framed inspirational quotes, a whiteboard with active notes on one wall, a desk covered in the organized chaos of someone managing multiple concurrent priorities, and 2 chairs across from it that were functional rather than comfortable, which was deliberate. She was 51, with close-cropped gray hair, and the posture of someone who'd spent 30 years not letting things show that didn't need to be shown. She'd come up through military police, transitioned to K-9 coordination, and spent the last 8 years building the regional unit into something that federal agencies actually returned calls to. Ethan had worked under her for 3 years and respected her in the specific, uncomplicated way you respected someone who was competent and fair and didn't waste your time. She read the folder start to finish, while he sat across from her and Titan lay on the floor between them. Carver sat to the side, coffee in hand, not saying anything. When she finished, she closed the folder and set it precisely in the center of her desk. The teacher filed a complaint saying Titan was used to intimidate. "Yes, ma'am." "During a school meeting?" "Yes." She looked at Titan. He looked back at her with the mild, half-lidded expression of a dog who was comfortable in the room and not particularly interested in performing anything for anyone. "He was on a leash," she said, "the whole time. And he—" She paused. "Did what, exactly, during the meeting?" "Lay on the floor, occasionally looked at the door when someone came in. At one point he yawned." Carver made a sound that was technically a cough. Hess's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. "Okay." She folded her hands on the desk. "Here's my position. Titan is a unit asset and a registered working animal. The complaint that was filed mischaracterizes both his behavior and his deployment. I can address that in writing to the district, which will effectively close that particular line of attack because no HR manager in a public school district wants to be on record claiming that a federal working dog was weaponized in a conference room." Ethan nodded once. "What I cannot do," she continued, "is manage the broader situation for you. What happens at 10 o'clock is between you and the district. The unit's involvement is limited to the specific mischaracterization of Titan's status and behavior." She paused. "But I can tell you that the letter from this office will land before your 10 o'clock meeting. That's within my authority, and it's the right call." "Thank you, Major." "Don't thank me." She filed against a federal working animal because he made her nervous. Hess picked up a pen and made a note on the pad beside her. "That's not a complaint. That's a document that creates problems for her, not for you, and she'll figure that out when the letter arrives." She looked up. "What's the district actually after? What's Garner trying to accomplish?" Ethan thought about the right way to say it. She made a mistake in front of witnesses, and she's trying to bury the record under a counter-complaint. If the district is spending time processing my conduct, they're not spending time processing hers. Classic counter-referral. Hess said it without effect. And the district is going along with it? They're giving it procedural weight, because it's easier than acknowledging their teacher publicly humiliated a disabled child. She said that flatly, too, not as an editorial, just the shape of the thing. "Your daughter is 9. "Yes." "And she did a school project about your work." "Yes." Hess looked at the folder, then at him. "Bring her to the 10 o'clock. He blinked. It was one of the rare times in recent memory that something surprised him. "I was going to drop her at school before she—" "Bring her," Hess said. "She's the one this happened to. She should be in the room when it gets resolved." A pause. "That's not an order. That's an opinion. But I've been in a lot of rooms where the person the problem was actually about wasn't present, and those rooms always resolve more slowly and more poorly than they should." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "She'll have to miss more school," he said. "She'll survive." He almost smiled. "Yeah." He called Chloe from the parking lot. She picked up on the third ring, already at school, recess period from the background noise. "Change of plans," he said. "I need you at a meeting at 10. A pause. The district thing? Yeah. I thought you said I didn't have to come. I changed my mind. Another pause. She was thinking. He let her. Is something bad happening? Something's happening. I want you there. Okay. No argument, no pushing back, just the quick renegotiation of a kid who had learned that when her father changed course, there was usually a reason that would make sense later. I'll tell my teacher. I'll call the office. Dad. Yeah. Are you okay? The question caught him slightly off angle. She asked it so directly, with such unguarded intention. He was used to her being perceptive, but this was different. She wasn't reading the terrain, she was just asking. I'm good, he said. Go finish recess. I'm done with recess, I'm reading. Go read then. He hung up and sat in the truck for a moment with the morning sun coming at a flat angle through the windshield and Titan breathing steadily in the back. He thought about what Hess had said. She should be in the room when it gets resolved. He'd been trying to manage this for Chloe. Keep the uglier parts at a distance she couldn't see clearly. That was the instinct. Protect her from the mechanics of the thing. Let her experience the outcome without the process. But Hess was right. Chloe had been in the room when it started. She'd been there Tuesday in the first meeting. She'd been at the conference table Friday, asking Garner the question nobody else had asked. She wasn't a bystander to this. She was the whole reason any of them were here. He started the engine. The district conference room looked the same. Same institutional carpet, same motivational phrases stenciled on the wall outside, same parking lot view from the windows. But the composition of the room was different. Pruitt was there, and Marsh, and Decker. Garner was there, and this time she had someone with her. A man in his 40s in a sport coat who introduced himself as Alan Freer, and whose card said he was with an education advocacy firm, which was a category of professional that existed specifically to sit beside teachers in meetings like this one and make the meeting more complicated than it needed to be. Ethan looked at the card for a moment. Then he set it on the table. He'd brought Chloe, who was positioned beside him, her chair pulled up to the table with the same adjustment he'd made Friday. He'd brought Titan, leashed, who went to the floor with the same unhurried inevitability. And he'd brought a second folder, thinner than the first, with a tab divider, which he set in front of him without opening. Freer looked at the dog, then at the folder, then at Ethan with the professional assessment of a man recalibrating his morning. Pruitt opened the meeting the same way she'd opened Fridays, the same language about paths forward, about everyone's well-being, about the district's commitment. Ethan let it run. He'd learned, in rooms very different from this one, but with the same underlying dynamic, that the opening statement was rarely the real information. The real information was in what happened when the opening statement was done. What happened was, Marsh introduced the addendum, Garner's secondary complaint. He used measured language, concerns about the meeting environment, questions about the appropriateness of certain elements. And he did not use the phrase deliberate psychological intimidation that Reeves had quoted from the document, though Ethan knew it was in there. Before we get into the substance of Ms. Garner's addendum, Ethan said, when Marsh finished, I have something from my unit command. He produced a single sheet from the second folder and slid it across the table to Pruitt. She read it. Her expression changed, not dramatically, but in the way that faces changed when they encountered something that reorganized the room they were standing in. She passed it to Marsh. He read it. His jaw moved slightly. She passed it to Freer. He read it faster than either of them, with the focused speed of a man who knew exactly what he was looking for, found it, and understood what it meant. The letter was on unit letterhead. It was signed by Major Christine Hess and addressed to the Millfield School District Office of Human Resources. It was 3 paragraphs. The first stated Titan's working status and certification. The second noted that the characterization of Titan's behavior in the filed complaint was factually inaccurate and inconsistent with all witness accounts, including those from district personnel present at both meetings. The third paragraph, the one Freer had found fastest, noted that the filing of a formal complaint containing material mischaracterizations of a federally registered working animal's behavior was a matter that the unit would be monitoring and that, if escalated, would require formal response at the federal coordination level. It was not a threat. It was written in the language of administrative fact, every sentence documentable and sourced, but it had the weight of a door being closed firmly from the other side of a room. Garner had been watching Pruitt read it. When Pruitt set it down, Garner looked at Freer. Freer was looking at the letter. He did not look at her. "I think," Pruitt said, with the careful precision of someone choosing each word with full awareness of the words they were choosing, "we should take a brief recess." "I'd rather keep going," Ethan said. Pruitt looked at him. "We've been in process since Tuesday," he said. "My daughter has missed parts of 2 school days. I have documentation establishing everything she said in her presentation was accurate. I have a unit letter addressing the secondary complaint. If there's something else the district needs to address this morning, I'd like to do it now." Decker, who had been very quiet in the corner of his chair, made a small movement, or not quite a nod, but close. Pruitt looked at Garner. Garner was looking at the letter, or looking at the table. It was hard to tell. Her posture had gone through a shift that was almost architectural. A thing that had been holding a certain shape had quietly stopped holding it. "Patricia," Pruitt said, "in light of this—" "I understand," Garner said. Her voice was controlled, flat, the voice of someone who had gotten to the end of the calculation and didn't like the number. "I think," Pruitt said slowly, "we should formally withdraw the addendum." Freer put his pen down. He picked it back up. He was doing the math on what this meant for the rest of his morning, and more specifically, for any future involvement with this district. "That would be advisable," he said, which was lawyer for, "We've lost this, and I would like to not be in this room anymore." The withdrawal was documented. Marsh wrote the notation by hand, initialed it, and Pruitt signed it. Garner did not sign it, which she didn't have to, but Ethan noticed. Freer noticed too, and the small look he gave her said that he'd be having a different kind of conversation with her somewhere private and later. Then Pruitt looked across the table and did something that Ethan hadn't anticipated. She looked at Chloe, not at Ethan, not at the folder, at the 9-year-old girl in the wheelchair who had been sitting beside her father for the last 40 minutes watching adults have a conversation about something that had happened to her. "Chloe," she said, "I want to apologize to you directly. What happened in your classroom should not have happened. You told the truth about your father, and you were not treated with the respect you deserved." She paused. "The district failed you. I'm sorry for that." The room was quiet. Chloe looked at her steadily, with that particular quality of attention she had, the one that made adults feel slightly examined when they weren't expecting it. "Thank you," she said. Then she looked at Garner. Garner looked back at her. Her expression had settled into something that was not comfortable or satisfied or relieved, something harder and more complicated, the expression of a person sitting in a room full of consequences they'd generated. Chloe didn't say anything to her. She just held the look for a moment, and then she looked down at her hands on the armrests, and then she looked at Titan. Titan was already looking at her. He'd been watching her for the last several minutes with his calm, constant attention, the way he always watched her when the room was tense and she was the smallest person in it. "Can I ask something?" Chloe said. "Of course," Pruitt said. "The assignment was to present a hero, someone real." She paused. "I never got to finish. Can I finish it? In front of everyone? The whole class?" A silence. "I think that's absolutely something we can arrange," Decker said. And this time when he said something, it didn't sound managed. Garner looked at the table. Freer quietly put his pen in his jacket pocket. Ethan didn't say anything, because there was nothing left that needed to be said. His daughter had just walked into the center of the room and taken it, quietly, without raising her voice or demanding anything, just asking for what had always been hers to begin with. The morning light through the conference room windows had gone from gray to a clear, flat gold. It landed on the table between the two sides and made the documentation and the letters and the legal notepads look very small and very ordinary. Titan yawned. It was the first sound he'd made in 2 hours. Freer stood to leave first. As he passed Titan's position on the floor, the Malinois lifted his head and looked at the man with the unhurried, absolute directness of an animal that did not perform and did not pretend and had never needed to. Freer moved slightly to his left. Titan put his head back down. And in the quiet that followed, As the district administrators shuffled papers and Decker began working out the logistics of a second classroom presentation and Pruitt drafted language for the formal record, Ethan reached across the small distance between himself and his daughter and put his hand briefly on her shoulder. She put her hand over his. They stayed that way for exactly as long as it needed to be, which was not very long at all, and then Ethan straightened and Chloe let go and they both turned back to the table because there were still details to settle, and they were the kind of people who stayed until the details were settled. But the thing that had needed to happen had happened. And everyone in the room, even the ones who hadn't wanted to be there, even the one who still couldn't bring herself to look up from the table, knew exactly what it was. The logistics took another 40 minutes. Decker wanted the presentation scheduled for the following Wednesday, which gave enough time to notify parents and arrange the auditorium properly. He'd suggested moving it out of the classroom entirely, into a larger space, which Ethan read as the administrator's instinct to convert a correction into an event, something that could be communicated upward as a positive outcome rather than a remediation. He didn't object. The auditorium was fine. The auditorium was better for Chloe, actually. More space to move, better acoustics, a stage with a proper ramp. Pruitt stayed for the first 20 minutes of logistics and then excused herself with the quiet efficiency of someone whose involvement had served its purpose and who had other fires. Marsh left with her. Freer had been gone since before the documentation was countersigned, which was fast even by the standards of people paid to exit gracefully. That left Decker, Tanya Reeves, and Garner. Garner had not spoken since the apology. She sat at the end of the table with her legal pad closed in front of her and participated in the logistics discussion the way furniture participated in a room. Present, occupying space, not contributing anything that moved the conversation forward. Reeves handled most of the coordination, pulling up the school calendar on her laptop and working through the scheduling with a brisk competence that suggested she'd been waiting for someone to let her actually do her job. Chloe answered questions when they were directed to her. Did she want to use a microphone? Yes. Would she want Titan on stage? A pause. Then yes. And otherwise sat beside her father with the contained stillness of someone who had spent the last 3 hours at a level of concentration that had earned her the right to coast for 20 minutes. When it was done and they were moving toward the door, Garner stood. Chloe. Everyone stopped. Garner was looking at the girl, not at Ethan, not at the table. Her hands were at her sides. She looked like a person who had rehearsed something and was now discovering that the rehearsed version wasn't going to come out the way she'd planned. I was wrong, she said. Not just about the facts, about how I handled it. A pause. The words were coming slowly, like she was pulling them from somewhere they didn't want to come from. I embarrassed you in front of people who matter to you, and I didn't ask you a single question first. I just decided. She stopped. That was wrong. I'm sorry. Chloe looked at her for a long moment. Okay, she said. Not it's fine or I forgive you or any of the phrases adults coach children toward in these moments. Just okay. Acknowledgement without absolution, which was, Ethan thought, probably more honest than anything else she could have said. Garner nodded once. She picked up her legal pad and her closed pen and walked out of the conference room ahead of all of them, and when the door swung shut behind her, the room felt like it had exhaled. Reeves looked at Chloe. You doing all right? Yeah, Chloe said. I'm hungry. Reeves laughed, short and genuine, the laugh of someone who had been in professional mode for 3 hours and had momentarily been given permission to be a human being. There's a decent taco place 2 blocks east. Chloe looked at her father. I know, he said. Let's go. Cham. They didn't talk about the meeting over tacos. This was an established family protocol. Decompress first, debrief later, and only if the debrief was actually necessary. Sometimes things that felt like they needed to be processed just needed to be slept on, and what had seemed urgent at noon looked different at 7 in the evening with food in you and distance between you and the room. Chloe ate with the focused efficiency of someone who had been running on adrenaline and was now discovering the bill had come due. She finished 1 taco before she said anything that wasn't a request for salsa, and what she said was, Titan wants one. Titan doesn't eat tacos. He thinks he does. He's wrong. Titan, under the table, made no comment. He'd been given a water bowl by the counter staff, a small outdoor patio, the restaurant's concession to working animals, and was currently resting his chin on Chloe's shoe in the way he did when he was off duty, and she was nearby and he had decided these were optimal conditions. "Can I ask you something?" Chloe said. "Yeah." "Why did Major Hess help?" He looked at her. "Because the complaint misrepresented what Titan is." "But she didn't have to write the letter. She could have just said okay and stayed out of it." "That's not how she operates." "How does she operate?" He thought about the right way to say it. "She decides what's accurate and she says so. That's most of it." Chloe ate the second taco in 3 bites, which was slightly too ambitious, but she managed. "Is she like you?" "In some ways, she's better organized." "That's not hard." "No," he agreed. She looked at the street beyond the patio railing, late morning traffic, a woman walking a stroller, the ordinary rhythm of a Tuesday that had not been ordinary at all. "When Ms. Garner said sorry just now, in the room," she paused. "Did you believe her?" He took his time. "I think she meant it more than she expected to. But not completely. People rarely mean things completely right away. Sometimes it takes a while to catch up to what you said." Chloe considered this with the serious attention she gave things she was filing for later. "That's kind of sad." "A little. But you're not angry at her?" "I didn't say that." "You seem like you're not." "I'm managing it." She looked at him, this particular look she had, direct and slightly too accurate for a 9-year-old. "Is managing it the same as not feeling it?" He looked back at her. "No." "Okay," she said. "Good." He wasn't sure what she meant by that, and he didn't ask because some things she said were for herself as much as for him, and this felt like one of those. He dropped her at school for the afternoon. She had math and science and a library period she'd been looking forward to, and then drove to the unit facility for the first time since the weekend. Carver was in the parking lot when he pulled in, finishing a radio check on his vehicle's external comms unit, which meant he was prepping for an afternoon drill. He looked up when Ethan's truck pulled in and raised an eyebrow. "How'd it go?" "Letter worked." "Thought it might." Carver clipped the radio back to his vest. "Hess asked for a full debrief?" "She will." "She's in the south building running quals. She said to find her after 2. Ethan nodded and started toward the main entrance. Carver fell into step beside him, which meant he had something else. "There's a thing," Carver said. "What thing?" "Reese talked to someone at the district, parent of a kid in Garner's class. Apparently when the complaint news started going around, the original one, Garner against you, some parents called the school to push back. Not a few. Enough that Decker got a stack of emails over the weekend." Ethan slowed slightly. "Parents from the school." "Parents of kids who were in the room when it happened. Apparently a couple of the kids went home and told their families what they saw, and the families were not—" Carver paused, looking for the word, "impressed with how Garner handled it." "I didn't know that." "You weren't supposed to yet. Reeves apparently has been managing it, keeping it quiet while the district process ran." He paused. "Point is, you didn't just have your own documentation in that room. You had community pressure you didn't know about." Ethan processed this. He thought about Marcus Webb, who had looked briefly at his poster board and then quickly away. He thought about 30 kids who had watched a teacher throw a drawing in the trash and had gone home and apparently said something about it. "What's the family situation with Garner?" he asked. "Meaning?" "Meaning, is she going to be in the classroom Wednesday?" Carver was quiet for a step. "That I don't know." "Find out." "Hayes, I'm not asking you to do anything about it. I just want to know before I put Chloe in that school for the presentation." Carver looked at him sideways. "You think she'd pull something?" "I think she's the kind of person who runs out of good options and then makes a bad one. I'd like to know the terrain." Carver made a sound that was acknowledgement and concern in equal parts. "I'll ask Reeves." They went inside. But the south building was where qualifications ran, a controlled indoor environment with adjustable configurations for search, detection, and apprehension scenarios. Hess was running a 2-dog rotation when Ethan came through the observation corridor, and he stood behind the glass for 10 minutes and watched. The dog working the current iteration was a Dutch Shepherd named Bracket, handled by a woman named Ose, who had 6 months on the unit and was working her first independent quals cycle. The scenario was a building search. 3 rooms, 2 decoys, 1 hidden training aid, and Bracket was moving through it with the focused intensity of a dog who knew exactly what he was doing and had not yet developed the patience that came with years of doing it. He was fast. He was slightly too aggressive on the second decoy. Hess's voice came through the intercom with 2 words, too early, and Ose brought him back. They ran it again. The third time, Bracket found the training aid in 47 seconds, which was not the record, but was within the acceptable window for a dog at his stage. Hess came through the observation corridor door while Ose was working Bracket's cooldown. Hayes. Major. She looked at him the way she looked at everything, directly, without preamble. Sit rep. He gave it to her in the format she preferred. Situation, action, outcome, assessment. 3 minutes. She listened without interrupting, which was her standard, and when he finished, she was quiet for a moment, looking at the dog on the other side of the glass. The addendum was withdrawn, she said. Yes, ma'am. District formally acknowledged the mischaracterization. In writing. And Garner apologized to your daughter directly. In the room. Yes. Hess nodded slowly. Okay, here's my assessment. She turned from the window. You handled the documentation correctly, and you handled the meetings correctly. The one thing I'd push back on is Tuesday. He waited. You went in without a read on what the teacher was actually trying to do. You thought you were establishing fact. She was establishing record. Those are different objectives, and they needed different approaches. She said it without heat, the tone of a post-op debrief, not criticism. Next time you're in a room where someone's filed ahead of you, go in knowing what the file says. I didn't know she'd file. No, but you knew she was managing optics. She looked at him. What was the signal? He thought. The way she read the folder Friday. She wasn't reading for information. Right. That was Tuesday's signal, actually, when she doubled down instead of retreating after you showed her the documents. That's the tell. Someone who's wrong and knows it retreats. Someone who's wrong and is building a case doesn't. She paused. You saw it, but you didn't act on it in time. I know. Don't do that again. No, ma'am. She was quiet for a moment. Bracket, across the glass, was being toweled down by Ose, leaning into it with the satisfied heaviness of a dog who had worked and been useful and knew it. Your daughter, Hess said. She's been in every meeting. Most of them. How is she? It was not quite a question. Hess didn't ask many questions she didn't already have a partial answer to. She's handling it better than she should have to, he said. That's not the same as handling it well. I know. Watch for the delayed reaction. Kids that age, they hold it together while it's happening, and then it catches up. She said it practically, not with overt feeling, but with the weight of someone who had children and had watched this happen. Give her some normal after Wednesday. She's earned it. Yeah. He started to stand. She stopped him with a look. One more thing, the presentation Wednesday. She folded her hands. Is it going to be enough for her? He looked at her. I mean, is it going to close it? For her, internally, because there's the official resolution, and then there's the resolution she carries. A pause. Those aren't always the same thing. He thought about that carefully. I don't know yet. Fair answer. She stood. Let me know if you need anything else from this office. I will. He was almost to the door when she said, Hayes. He stopped. She sounds like a good kid. She is, he said. She's better than I deserve. Hess made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was close to it. That's how it usually goes. The 3 days between Monday and Wednesday moved at an uneven pace, slow in the mornings, fast in the afternoons, with a compressed quality that came from anticipating something and not being able to accelerate toward it. Carver had confirmed by Monday evening that Garner would be in the building Wednesday, but had been moved to a planning period during the auditorium time slot. Ethan didn't know if that was Decker's decision or Pruitt's or Garner's own, and it didn't much matter. What mattered was that Chloe would be presenting to her classmates without the person who'd started all of this sitting in the front row. He'd asked Chloe if she wanted to practice the presentation again. "I know what I'm saying," she said. "I know, but you could—" "Dad, I practiced it for 4 days the first time. I know it." He left it alone. Tuesday night she was quieter than usual, which he watched but didn't press. She ate dinner, did her homework, spent an hour with a book, and went to bed. At 10:30 he saw from the hallway that her light was still on. He knocked once. "Yeah. You should sleep." "I know." A pause. "You nervous?" he asked. "A little." "That's fine." "Is it?" "Yeah. Nervous means you care about it. That's useful." A longer pause. "What if it's weird, after everything? What if it's weird and the kids just stare at me and it doesn't feel like anything?" He leaned against the doorframe. "It might be weird." "That's not helpful." "What I mean is, it might not feel the way you expect it to feel, and that's okay. The important thing isn't how it feels in the room, it's that you finish what you started." Silence from the other side of the door. He could hear her breathing and the faint sound of Titan shifting somewhere in the room, resettling. "Okay," she said finally. "Good night." "Night." He went back down the hallway, and the light under her door went out a few minutes later. Wednesday arrived the way important days arrived, unremarkably. Gray sky softening to pale blue. The normal sequence of breakfast and the normal resistance to getting shoes on, and the drive to school that looked the same as every other drive to school, except for the folder on the back seat and Titan in his compartment, and Chloe with her hands in her lap and her chin slightly up. The auditorium was a long room with raked seating and a low stage with actual stage lighting, which the custodial staff had turned on when Ethan arrived early at Decker's request to check the setup. The ramp to the stage was on the left side, solid, no wobble. The microphone was adjusted before anyone came in. Reeves was there, and a pair of teachers Ethan hadn't met before, and Decker standing near the back with the expression of a man who wanted this to go well badly enough that he was probably getting in his own way thinking about it. The third grade class arrived at 9:15, herded by a substitute who was not Patricia Garner, and they came in with the noise of children who had been told to be quiet and were interpreting this instruction liberally. They filed into the first several rows. Ethan was standing to the left of the stage and he watched them come in, 30-some kids, looking for the ones who might remember, who had been in room 114 the previous Tuesday, who had watched. He saw Marcus Webb in the third row, who found him almost immediately and gave him a look that was hard to categorize. Not guilt, something more complicated. The look of a kid who had thought about something for a week and hadn't figured out where to put it yet. He saw two other faces he recognized from classroom pickup, kids Chloe had mentioned by name at various points. He saw a girl in the second row who had been one of the ones laughing. She wasn't laughing now. She was looking at the stage. Chloe came in through the side entrance, and the noise level didn't drop dramatically the way it did in movies, but something changed in the room's frequency. A few heads turned. Someone whispered. The whisper spread in the particular ripple of children communicating without appearing to communicate. She wheeled to the foot of the stage ramp, paused, and looked at the audience. Then she looked at Ethan. He didn't nod or gesture or give her anything she could lean on. She didn't need it, and they both knew it. She turned and went up the ramp. Titan, at Ethan's left, watched her go with his ears forward and his body still, the complete attention of an animal that understood the assignment, even when nobody had given him one. Chloe reached the stage and positioned herself at the microphone. The feedback squeal that came from a slight angle adjustment made a quarter of the kids flinch, and she made the same face everyone makes when a microphone does that, a wincing half grin. And somebody in the third row laughed, and suddenly the room was 2 degrees warmer than it had been. She cleared her throat. "My name is Chloe Hayes," she said, "and this is my hero presentation." A pause. She looked at the audience with the particular calm of someone who had been afraid of this moment for 10 days and had arrived at the other side of the fear and found it smaller than expected. "My hero is my dad." She talked for 18 minutes. She talked about Titan first, how Belgian Malinois were selected for working roles, what the testing looked like, how a dog that washed out of the program didn't fail but was repurposed, which most people didn't know, and which seemed to genuinely interest the kids in a way that the more formal facts hadn't. She talked about the scent training, the hours, the way Titan could distinguish between dozens of individual human scent traces in a contaminated environment. She talked about the hip issue Titan had been managing for the last year and how her father did his stretches every morning and Titan did his, and they were both grumpy about it. The room laughed at that, real laughter, the kind that kids gave when something was actually funny and not when they thought they were supposed to find it funny. She talked about her father, not his awards, not his commendations. She talked about the phone calls from the field, the broken connection, the way she'd learned to fill in what she couldn't hear from the silences between words. She talked about him teaching her to read a map before she could reliably read a chapter book. She talked about a night 2 years ago when a family 2 counties over had called 911 for a missing child, and her father had been the one who'd gotten the call. And she'd known about it because she'd been awake and heard his truck leaving at 2 in the morning. And she'd counted the hours until she heard it come back. And when it came back, she'd heard 2 car doors, his and the victim coordinator's. And she'd known it was okay. She hadn't told him she was counting the hours. She'd never told him that. Ethan, standing at the left side of the stage, heard this for the first time along with everyone else. He looked at the side wall and did not look at anything in particular for several seconds. She talked about what it meant to have a hero who wasn't famous, who didn't have a movie made about him, who went to work and came home and made tacos when she asked for them, and was strict about her bedtime, but not about the nature documentaries. She talked about courage not looking the way people expected. When she finished, she said, "He couldn't be here today because he's working, which is exactly the point." She looked out at the room. 30-some kids looking back at her. Some of them had been in the same auditorium 2 weeks ago for a different reason entirely, and she knew that, and she didn't address it because it didn't need to be addressed. The room was different now. She was different now. That was enough. The applause started before she'd fully turned her chair to leave the stage, and it wasn't polite applause. It was the loud, uncoordinated applause of children who hadn't been told to clap but were doing it anyway, which is the only kind that actually matters. Ethan exhaled. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. Titan pressed lightly against his left leg. Not a trained behavior, just the dog's way of registering that something significant had occurred, and that his handler was processing it, and that he was, as always, exactly where he was supposed to be. Chloe came down the ramp. She came straight to him, which surprised him slightly, and she didn't say anything, but she stopped her chair right beside him, and they both watched the room for a moment. The kids still clapping, Decker nodding from the back row, Reeves writing something on her notepad that was definitely not professional notes. "How was that?" Chloe said. "Perfect," he said, and for once he didn't qualify it. She looked at him sideways. "You cried." "I didn't cry." "Your eyes are wet." "It's dry in here." "It's really not." He looked down at her. She was looking up at him with the expression she had when she was pretending not to be pleased about something, the mouth corner thing, the careful neutral that wasn't quite holding. "You were right," he said. "You knew what you were talking about." She held the almost smile for a second. "Yeah," she said. "I did." The auditorium emptied the way. Auditoriums emptied after something that had actually meant something. Slowly, with people finding reasons to linger, nobody quite wanting to be the first one to return to the ordinary business of the day. The third-grade class filed out in a loose cluster, still talking, the conversation having the particular velocity of children who had just experienced something and were processing it at full volume simultaneously. Ethan heard fragments. "Did you know dogs could do that? My cousin has a lab, but that's different," she said. "Her dad makes tacos." The information sorting itself into whatever categories 9 and 10-year-olds used for things that landed. Marcus Webb stopped at the auditorium door and looked back at Ethan. Just for a second. Then he went through with the rest of them. Decker made his way down from the back row, shaking hands with the 2 teachers, and when he reached Ethan, he was direct about it in a way that felt, for the first time, unmanaged. "That was something," he said. "Yeah. She did well. Really well." He paused. "I want you to know that what happened in Ms. Garner's class, the original incident, we've opened a formal performance review. I can't discuss the details, but I wanted you to know it's not being set aside." Ethan looked at him. "I appreciate that." It should have been the first response, not the last. Decker said it plainly, which cost him something, and Ethan could see that it cost him. "I'm sorry it took this long. The important thing is it got there." Decker nodded and moved on, and Ethan didn't watch him go. He was watching Chloe, who was over near the stage talking to Reeves, apparently answering questions about Titan's training timeline, with the focused enthusiasm of a kid who had spent her whole life absorbing information on a subject and had finally found an adult who was genuinely asking. Titan sat beside Ethan and watched Chloe with his ears forward and his tail doing its slow, low sweep, the relaxed contentment of a dog in a room where his two people were both accounted for and nobody was in distress. Ethan reached down and put his hand on the dog's head. Titan leaned into it slightly, the way he always did when the pressure of a situation had come down, and he allowed himself to acknowledge that he'd been carrying something. Same, Ethan thought. No. He let Chloe finish the school day. She'd asked, with a practical directness that reminded him painfully of her mother, whether she could just stay since she was already there, and he'd said yes and dropped off Titan and come back at 3:15 like any other Tuesday, except it wasn't Tuesday, and it wasn't like any other anything. She came out through the main entrance in the stream of end-of-day kids, and she was talking to a girl Ethan didn't recognize. Small, dark-haired, backpack slightly too large for her. And whatever they were talking about was making Chloe smile in the loose, unguarded way she smiled when she wasn't thinking about smiling. She saw him and said something to the other girl, who looked at Ethan briefly and then waved at Chloe and went toward the bus line. "Who's that?" Ethan asked. "Priya. She moved here in October. She's in the other third-grade class." Chloe started toward the car. She said she heard about the presentation from her teacher. She wanted to know if Titan was actually as big as people said. "What did you tell her?" "I said he was bigger." He looked down at her. "He's not that big." "I know, but it sounded better." He put the chair in the back and they drove, and the afternoon had that particular golden quality that late October got, when the sky decided to stop being gray for a few hours, and reminded you that it was still capable of this, still capable of the flat amber light that made ordinary streets look like something a photographer had planned. Chloe had the window cracked and her arm resting on the door in the way she did when she was unwinding, which she almost never did in cars because she spent so much mental energy on the transitions in and out of them. She wasn't thinking about transitions right now. She was watching the town go by. "Dad?" "Yeah." "What happens to Ms. Garner?" He kept his eyes on the road. "What do you mean?" "You said Decker opened a review. What does that actually mean for her?" "Depends on what they find. Could be mandatory retraining, could be a formal reprimand in her file, could be more." "Could she lose her job?" He took a moment. "It's possible. Depends on whether this is the first time something like this has happened or not." Chloe was quiet. "Does that bother you?" he asked. "I don't know." She sounded like she meant it. Not evasion, genuine uncertainty. "I don't want her to lose her job because of me." "It wouldn't be because of you, it would be because of what she did." "That's the same thing." "It really isn't." She thought about this for several blocks. "I just want her to understand. Actually understand, not just say the right words." She paused. "I don't think making her lose her job does that." "No," he agreed. "It probably doesn't." "So what does?" He didn't have a clean answer for that, and she knew he didn't, and neither of them pretended otherwise. Some questions weren't looking for answers. They were looking for company. 3 days later, Ethan got a call from a number he didn't know. He almost didn't pick up. He was in the middle of a gear check for a deployment scheduled for the following week, a search and recovery operation 2 states over that had been on his calendar for 6 weeks. But something made him answer. "Mr. Hayes, this is Patricia Garner." He set down the radio harness he'd been examining. "Ms. Garner." "I know this is unusual. I got your number from the parent contact sheet. I want you to know I won't use it again. This is the one call. I just—" A pause. She sounded different on the phone than she had in any of the meetings, less constructed. "I wanted to tell you something that I couldn't say in the conference room." "Go ahead." A longer pause. He could hear her breathing, the slight unsteadiness of someone who had rehearsed this and was now finding that the rehearsal didn't cover the actual experience of saying the thing. "I watched the presentation on Wednesday. I know I was supposed to be in planning period. I know I wasn't. I stood at the back of the auditorium where no one could see me. I watched the whole thing. She stopped. She's extraordinary, your daughter, the way she spoke about you. I've been teaching for 14 years and I've seen a lot of presentations and I've never... She stopped again. I'm not saying this to make myself feel better. I just needed you to know that I saw it. I really saw it. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Why are you telling me? He asked. Not hostile, just the question. Because she deserved to have someone say it. And you're the person who gets to hear things on her behalf when the world hasn't figured out yet that she can hear them herself. A pause. She knows exactly who she is. That's not common. Not at that age. You did that. Ethan looked at the garage wall, at a spot between two equipment hooks, at nothing. I appreciate the call, he said. I know I can't fix what happened in the classroom. I know the apologies I know they don't go back and change anything for her. Another pause. But I wanted you to know that it changed something for me. That's not your problem to care about. She exhaled. I just wanted to say it. A silence. Ms. Garner? Yes. She counted the hours once, when I got called out at 2 a.m. She stayed up and counted the hours until I got back. She never told me. She told a room full of third graders because it was true and it was hers to tell. He paused. She didn't need you to believe her for it to be true. She just needed the chance to finish saying it. A very long pause. I know, Garner said. I know that now. He didn't say anything else, and neither did she for a few seconds. And then she said goodbye and he said goodbye, and the call ended. He stood in the garage for a while after that, not picking up the radio harness, not moving toward the next item on the prep list. After a while, Titan came through the dog door and sat next to him, and leaned lightly against his leg. And they stayed like that for a while, in the way that people and their dogs sometimes stood together when there was nothing that needed doing and no one that needed anything, and the afternoon was just the afternoon. Mbalkinton. The week before the deployment, Ethan told Chloe. He always told her. He'd made that decision when she was 5, after a conversation with a family counselor who'd worked with K-9 handler households, and who had said, plainly and without dressing it up, children handle absence better when they're told the truth about it. They handle it worst when they sense something and aren't told anything at all. He'd been telling her since she was 5. She handled it the same way she handled most things, by processing it internally for a while and then asking very specific questions when she was ready. The question she asked this time was, how long? Probably 8 days, could be 10. Is it the recovery op? Yeah. The one in... She paused. I'm not supposed to know where. Right. Okay. She thought about it. Aunt Karen? She's available. Or you could stay with the Delroys if you want more. Aunt Karen's fine. He nodded. They were in the kitchen, the usual position for this kind of conversation. Table between them, cups of something. The domestic setting that made hard conversations feel slightly less like they existed outside of ordinary life. You've got the presentation behind you, he said. That's good timing. You timed a search and recovery operation around my school presentation. Obviously. She looked at him, checking whether he was serious, which he mostly wasn't, and then she smiled and looked at her cup. Be careful. Always am. You're really not. I'm careful enough. That's not the same thing. He looked at her. No, it's not. A pause. I'll be back in 10 days, probably 8. I know. She turned the cup in her hands. Titan goes? Titan goes. She nodded, looking at the dog across the kitchen, who was occupying his spot beside the refrigerator with his head on his paws and his eyes on Ethan in the watchful way that meant he'd already read the energy of the conversation and understood that it was a before-something conversation. He always comes back too, she said. Every time. Okay? She stood and moved toward the hallway. I'm going to read. Chloe, she stopped. You know that thing you said in the presentation about counting the hours? She didn't turn around. Her shoulders moved, not away, just a slight shift. Yeah. I didn't know, he said. I should have known. You were working. That's not the point. She was quiet for a moment. Then she turned around and looked at him with the expression she had when something was true, but she hadn't decided yet if she wanted to say it out loud. I wasn't scared you weren't coming back, she said. I was just... She paused. I wanted to know when. That's different from scared. Is it? Yeah. She held his look. Scared is when you think something bad is going to happen. Counting is what you do when you know it's fine, but you want to know how long until fine arrives. He held the look. I'll call when I can, he said. I know. She went down the hallway. He heard her door, the soft close of it, and then the faint sound of her settling, and then nothing. He looked at Titan. Titan looked back at him. Yeah, Ethan said quietly, to neither of them in particular. He left on a Thursday at 5 a.m. before Chloe woke up. That was intentional. She'd asked him to do it that way years ago. She'd been 6, and she'd said, I don't like watching you leave. I'd rather just wake up and you're already gone. And he'd understood that immediately and completely because he was the same way about certain things, and she had gotten it from somewhere. He left a note on the kitchen table. He always left a note. They were never long. Logistics, the number for the family liaison, sometimes a short line that was just something he'd been thinking about. This one said, 8 days. Probably less. Don't let Aunt Karen put cilantro in everything. She will try. I watched the presentation from the doorway for the last 5 minutes. You already knew that. I love you. He and Titan loaded out in the gray pre-dawn, the truck quiet, the neighborhood still, and drove east on the highway toward the facility where the rest of the team was staging. He did not look back at the house when he left. He never did. Not because it was easy, but because looking back made the leaving worse, and the leaving was already what it was, and the job was to get there and do it right and come home. He was back in 7 days. The operation had run clean, not without difficulty. There had been a 26-hour stretch in the second day where the trail went cold and the team had spread to secondary grid positions, and Titan had worked a combined 11 hours across 2 sessions with the focused, relentless efficiency of a dog who had learned that the job was not done until it was done, but clean in the way that clean meant. Everyone on the team came back, and the people they were looking for were found, and those people were alive. He drove home on a Thursday evening with Titan in the back and the particular quiet of a man who had closed the loop on something and was now returning to the other thing, the permanent thing, the one that waited. Aunt Karen's car was in the driveway. The kitchen light was on. He came in through the garage and Titan went immediately to the water bowl, drinking in the long, steady way of a dog who had been conserving in the field and was now in a safe place and could let himself need things again. He heard the TV from the living room, the nature documentary frequency, the specific timbre of a narrator explaining something about ecosystems, and he went to the living room doorway and leaned against it. Chloe was on the couch. She'd figured out a way to get from the wheelchair to the couch that involved a specific angle and a throw pillow positioned precisely, and a move she'd developed over 2 years that she referred to, with complete seriousness, as the maneuver. She was on the couch with her legs tucked and a book on her lap, and the TV on the way some people had music on, present, not quite attended to. She looked up. She didn't say anything. She looked at him the way she looked at things she was checking, confirming status, confirming presence, and then she looked at Titan, who had come in behind him, and then back at him. 7 days, she said. 7 days. You said probably 8. I said probably 8, possibly less. You said 8. We're going to have different memories of this conversation. Because I'm right and you know it. She sat up slightly. How's Titan? Tired, fine, worked hard. Titan had gone to the couch, resting his chin on the cushion beside Chloe with the unselfconscious demand of a working dog who had been professional for 7 days and was now among people with whom he did not have to be professional. Chloe put her hand on his head without looking at him. Aunt Karen made pasta, she said. There's some left. Thank her for me. She's asleep. She goes to bed at 9:30. It's weird. She's always done that. Still weird. He sat down in the chair across from the couch, the one that required clearing a library book and a folded blanket, which he did without ceremony and without mentioning it. and the room had the specific warmth of a place that had been inhabited by someone he loved for the duration of his absence, which was its own kind of information. "How was school?" he asked. "Normal? Better or worse than normal?" She thought about it. "Better? Priya and I have been eating lunch together. She's weird about bees, like she knows a lot about them. She just starts talking about bees sometimes. It's good, though. Interesting." "She sounds good." "She is." Chloe looked at him. "Ms. Garner isn't teaching our class anymore." He looked at her. "Decker told us on Monday. He said she's been reassigned to a curriculum development role while the district does a review. The substitute is fine. She's actually better. She asks questions before she says anything." "How do you feel about that?" She considered it with her characteristic seriousness. "I don't know if it's what she deserved or not. That's hard to figure out." She paused. "I feel okay about it. She's not gone. She's just not in our room. Maybe she figures something out. Maybe she doesn't." A pause. "I hope she does." He looked at his daughter. 9 years old, on a couch with a book in her lap, and a dog on her shoulder, and enough complexity in her to fill a room with it. "Yeah," he said. "Me too." She looked at the TV. Something about deep-sea fish with bioluminescent markings, which apparently warranted the sustained attention she was now giving it. He let her watch. He was tired and he was home, and the gap between those two things was exactly the width of this room. And right now, it was a gap he was glad to be on the right side of. After a while, she said, without looking away from the TV, "Marcus Webb came up to me at recess on Monday." "Yeah?" "He said he was sorry he didn't say anything when it happened, in the classroom." She paused. "He said he wanted to, but he didn't." Ethan was quiet. "What did you tell him?" he said. "I said it was okay, that I understood." She glanced at him briefly. "Is that the right thing to say?" "Was it true?" She thought about it. "Yeah, I do understand. It's hard to say something when everyone else isn't saying anything." "Then it was the right thing to say." She looked back at the TV. "He seems less like he was carrying something after he said it. That's what saying the thing does, for the person who says it." "Did it do anything for you when Garner apologized?" He thought about the conference room, and then about the phone call in the garage and the difference between them. "The second time was more real," he said. "The first time was managed. The second one—" He paused. She'd watched the presentation. Something had landed. "So it takes time sometimes." "Usually." She nodded, tucking her legs slightly tighter, resettling into the couch cushions with the satisfaction of someone who had confirmed a hypothesis. The bioluminescent fish were doing something extraordinary in the deep black water on the screen. Their cold light moving through the dark in patterns that were entirely purposeless from a human perspective and entirely purposeful from theirs, communicating in a frequency that only made sense if you were the kind of thing that could receive it. Ethan watched with her for a while. What? The following week, the district released its formal findings on the classroom incident. The language was official and careful, and said what it said without saying everything it meant, which was the nature of official documents. What it said, in substance, was that the incident had involved an error in professional judgment with significant impact on a student, and that revised classroom protocols had been implemented at North Valley Academy and would be applied district-wide, and that the district was committed to creating an environment where students' family backgrounds were treated with respect and verified before any public determination was made about their accuracy. Reeves sent Ethan a copy with a one-line note. "Not everything, but something. She deserved more, but the something is real." He read it twice and filed it in the folder, which was getting thick now, which meant it was close to full, which meant one of these days he was going to need to start a second one. He didn't tell Chloe about the document immediately. He waited for a day when the timing felt right, which turned out to be a Saturday afternoon, the two of them in the kitchen while she attempted pancakes from a recipe she'd found in a library book about regional American cooking. The recipe was ambitious, the results were uneven. The third one came out almost exactly right. "The district put out a formal finding," he said. She looked up from the pan. "And?" "And they acknowledged what happened, put new policies in place." "For real or for show?" He thought about Reeves's note. Some of both. The policies are real, the language is careful. She turned back to the pan. Better than nothing. Yeah. She flipped the fourth pancake, which was slightly too early, and it came out ragged on one side. She looked at it, made a small sound of annoyance, and put it on the plate anyway. I talked to Priya about it, she said. The whole thing. She'd heard bits from other kids, but not the whole thing. What did she say? She said she would have been furious. Chloe smiled slightly. She uses that word a lot. Furious. She's very expressive. Sounds like a good person to eat lunch with. She really is. She set the spatula down. She asked me how I stayed calm. In all the meetings and everything. I told her I was only calm on the outside. He looked at her. What were you on the inside? She thought about it with her whole face, the way she thought about things she wanted to answer accurately. Tired, she said. Mostly tired, and kind of determined, like I had to hold the thing up until it was finished, and I could be tired after. She picked the spatula back up. Is that weird? That's exactly what it is, he said. You were doing your job. She looked at him. I'm 9. Age doesn't have much to do with it. She looked down at the pan, at the next pancake forming, and was quiet for a moment. Then, Dad? Yeah. I'm glad you brought Titan that first day. Not for the reason she thought, but just... She paused. He's steady. It helped. Having something steady in the room. He's always steady. I know. She smiled, small and certain. So are you. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She knew. A month later, on a morning that had finally turned fully cold, the kind of cold that arrived and didn't negotiate, Ethan drove Chloe to school and Titan rode in the back the way he always did, watching the town go past with his quiet, cataloging attention. It was an ordinary morning. That was the thing about ordinary mornings. They arrived the same as all the other mornings, and you didn't know they were going to matter until later. At the school drop-off, Chloe did the transfer, positioned her chair, and started up the ramp before he could come around. She was getting faster at it. She was always getting faster at things. She stopped at the top and turned around. Call when you know about the weekend, she said. I will. And tell Titan his ears are normal-sized. He's been looking smug. He can't understand C. He can understand tone. He knows I said something nice about his ears last week, and he's been weird about it. Titan, in his compartment, made no comment. I'll tell him, Ethan said. She turned and wheeled toward the entrance, where the doors were already open and the noise of a school beginning its day came out into the cold air. Kids, teachers, the ordinary productive chaos of a place doing what it was supposed to do. She went in without looking back, which was a thing she'd always done, and which he'd always watched, because the not looking back was not indifference. It was trust. The same thing he did every time he drove east on the highway in the gray pre-dawn. She trusted the ending. She trusted the return. He stood beside the truck and watched the door close. And then he got in, and Titan's nose found the gap in the compartment divider the way it always did when they were about to move. And the morning went on around them, ordinary and cold and full of its own quiet work. Some people spent their whole lives waiting to be believed. Chloe Hayes had spent 9 years becoming someone who didn't need to wait. And the truest kind of courage isn't the kind that makes noise. It's the kind that stays standing, in silence, until the world finally catches up to what it should have known all along.